Welcome to the next lesson in control constructs, which focuses on two new forms of indefinite loops, the Java while loop and do while loop, which continue to iterate until some conditions are met. After completing these lessons, you will know the proper Java syntax for programming these loops, their capabilities and limitations, and when it is best to use them in your code.
Suppose I would like to reduce a number by 3 until it is less than or equal to 19. How many times should this loop be executed? Or what if I am asking the user to guess a number and I want to continue until they get it right? How can we make a loop that will continue to run under these conditions? What we are talking about here is a loop that can run indefinitely. As long as some condition is true, we will execute the protected code, seen here in green. When the condition or test becomes false, we exit the loop and continue with the rest of our code. The while loop will do exactly that. It repeatedly executes the code written in the body until some logical test is no longer true. Here's the syntax for a while loop. Take a look at this example. While num is greater than 19, I continue to subtract 3. We repeat until the number is no longer greater than 19, when we exit the loop and continue the rest of the program. A while loop is similar to a for loop and can actually be used in place of a for loop. We initialize I, test I, and increment I in much the same way. A for loop can take the place of a while loop, but this often results in poorly structured code that is difficult to read. To replicate the while loop on the right, we need to set up an infinite for loop by setting I to 0, test to see if I is greater than or equal to 0, and then continue to increment I. So do you see how this loop is going to be infinite? In the loop, we test to see if num has become less than 19, and if it has, we set I to some value that will stop this otherwise infinite loop. In this case, we had to set I to -2, so that when we increment I after the body is executed, we still have a value that's less than 0. There are other ways to write this for loop, but none of the solutions are going to be very readable. A good programmer will adopt the practice of using indefinite loops when the number of iterations is not known or easily calculated beforehand. The syntax of the while loop is almost identical to that of the if statement, but the results are quite different. In the if statement, the conditional total less than 5 is tested only once, and the total is increased once or not at all. In the while loop, the condition may be tested many times before we finally exit the loop. There are a lot of situations where a while loop is useful. For example, when interacting with a user. In this case, we can ask the user to enter a number with some constraints and then read it in. If the input does not meet the constraints, we enter the while loop and ask the user to try again. We read in the input and return to the top of the while loop to test the new data. This will continue until the user has input a valid number. You may have noticed in that last example that there was some redundant code. We had to write the next int code twice. In many cases, this can be avoided by using another indefinite loop, the do while loop. The do while loop is also considered an indefinite loop and is best used when the number of iterations is unknown, but we expect to run the protected code at least once. Notice how the diagram for this loop is slightly different. When we enter the loop, we immediately execute the body of the loop once. Then test the conditional to determine if we will execute the body again, or exit the loop altogether. Here is the syntax for a do while loop. Notice the test or conditional is at the bottom of the body of the loop. Here, let's look at an example. Notice that this code is enclosed in an if statement. We only enter the body of the if statement if our number is greater than 3 to begin with. We print out a statement and then enter the loop. The loop is executed once, printing out the number 3. I is then incremented, and then we test num. If num is still greater than 3 times I, in this case 6, we re-enter the loop. execute the body, test the condition again. Now you have seen some examples of two indefinite loops, the while loop and the do while loop. We reviewed when is the best time to use these constructs and how they differ from the for loop and the if statement. Take full advantage of the code walkthroughs, quizzes, and peer assessments to familiarize yourself with all of the basic control flow constructs you have seen thus far.
We're now done with this module's final lesson on looping, which introduced you to the Java while loop and do while loop. These indefinite loops continue to iterate until some conditions are met. Now that you've completed this lesson, you should know the proper Java syntax for programming these loops, their capabilities and limitations, and when it's best to use them in your code.